good or bad. So we will we'll move forward from here. Those of you who were gone last week have a notebook. There's the survey is in the back cover, and if you would start working through that as you can during this class, that would be great, and get that back to me. Also, the first lesson is posted on the website, and if you miss that, if you'll go and watch that. Any class you miss, if you would go and watch those, that would be wonderful. At the end of this class, we'll have another survey that'll be almost identical to the first one, and that will give me a way to compare before and after to see how how your thoughts have moved over the course period. But if you miss more than one of the classes, I can't use your data unless you watch it online. So it's on your honor. The last survey says I attended this many classes or saw this many of the videos, and so it's on your honor there. So if you would watch one of the items, that would be really great. All right. There's a tremendous amount of material that we're going to cover. A lot of it is complex. I've had several conversations with the elders about how do I present this and try to make it to where it's enjoyable, to where it's not heavy, complex. Some of this stuff you just can't make that way, so I apologize for that. If you don't understand all of this, raise your hand. I'm free to talk with you after class for as long as you want to talk. You can call me, you can text me, you can email me. My information's on the contact list. Don't get discouraged. If you don't understand something, just don't get discouraged. Biff?
You got 30 minutes of battery on your recorder.
Okay.
So move quickly.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have much time left anyway. All right, so we're gonna move through. So last week, if you recall, we said that apologetics is like a court case, where you go in and you make your opening statement, you make your opening argument, and you make that opening statement. And so in this class, we're making the opening statement, God exists and Christianity is true. That's our opening statement. Everything that we'll do to follow up from that will be to provide evidence that all points toward that. We're going to present all this different evidence to substantiate our opening argument, God exists and Christianity is true. And I wish Chris was here, my counselor. He could help me with my legal case here. So anyway, so that's how we're structured and how we're going to move forward. And so that is, God exists and Christianity is true. And so we'll go through like that. We've talked about where do we start? Where do we start with people like Michael? And we talked a little bit in the sermon this morning about common notions and common ground. And we can define that common notions or common ground. The common notions we define is that innate knowledge of God that all people have by virtue of being created in God's image. It's attested to in Scripture and in the book of nature. And so we are without excuse because we all have that within us as a result of being created in God's image. But this is nothing new. This idea of God being an innate part of our being and an innate part of our knowledge goes back to the ancient Greeks. Aristotle and Socrates, Plato, in the 3rd century BC talked about there being a higher being that existed. The unmoved mover. That there was some type of higher being out there, and we could look at the moon and the stars, and just by looking at that, you could tell that there was a God. Plato and Aristotle didn't believe in the God of Christianity, of course, but they knew that there was a God. Today, thanks to the Hubble telescope that was launched in 1990 and all the information that the Hubble has provided for us about the universe, and most recently the recent launch of the Webb telescope that we're just now starting to get some pictures back from, it would blow Aristotle and Plato's mind. They could have never dreamed of what they're seeing. So the question is actually this. So we'll start off. We're looking for common ground to talk to Michael. Remember, Michael's the one that doesn't believe in the Bible. So has the world always existed? And this is a way you can approach Michael and you say, let's start here. We know there's a world, right? Because we're in it. We know there's a world, so let's agree there's a world. Now let's start a conversation. Has it always been here? So if we start with that, we'll use our reason, and we'll reason through that, and that will be our common ground from where we will start. We're going to use reason with this individual. And so, as part of reason is logic. Logic has universal rules that everybody recognizes. It's logic, it's philosophy. These are international. All people through all times have understood the rules of logic and how they work. They're very straightforward. 2 plus 2 is 4 everywhere. Something can't be true and false at the same time everywhere. That's how logic works. And it builds upon those simple principles like that. And logical arguments are put together in this way. They're put together with premises, or this is a statement I'm going to make, and I'm saying this is true. And then you go through these, and sometimes they're very short, and sometimes they're very long, and then you come to a conclusion. So here's an example. So the first premise, let's say all bachelors are unmarried men. Okay? That's my premise. That's what I'm telling you. I'm putting that forward. God exists and Christianity is true, right? All bachelors are never married men. The second premise is John is a never married man. And so you reach a conclusion. Those are not there, but therefore, John is a bachelor. That's the very simplest form of a logical argument. Everybody agrees with that. So you can take that and you can work through logic of anything you can think of. The sky's blue. That's my premise. Then you work through all of those. So you present these premises and then you start going through each one of them point by point by point to either prove them right or prove them wrong, and that's how logic works. Here's another one for the mathematically minded. So premise 1, if A equals B, premise 2 is, and if B equals C, therefore A equals C. So there's no way around that. There's no way that that's not true. That conclusion is absolutely true. And there's no way to argue against that. That's how logic works, and that's what you want to get to. So if we say God exists, you build an argument for that. Of course, that's too complex. Some of these arguments get extremely complex. The Alvin Plantinga's free will defense has 42 premises. That's one of the longest ones that I've studied, but he's got 42 different premises that you get to before you get to the conclusion. But let's go back to our original question. Has the universe always existed? And we're going to look at what's called the cosmological argument. This is the argument, the name of the argument that's put together, the logical argument for us to determine if that's a true statement or not. And so the first premise, just like what we just looked at, the first premise is what begins to exist has a cause. And we'll go through these statements in more detail in a minute, but I want to show you the structure first. The second one is the universe began to exist. And then the conclusion is, therefore, the universe had a cause. Now, we're not talking to Christians, remember. We're looking at Michael, who doesn't believe in the authority of the Bible. We're trying to find that little bit of common ground to start from. We're going to get to the Bible eventually, and when we get there, he will believe that God is true, Christianity is true, Christ came and died, God rose Christ from the dead, and then, you've got him in a position where he says, okay, now I'll look at the Bible. Now you're where you need to be, but you can't start there, because he doesn't want to look at the Bible. So that's the premise. That's the argument. The Kalam Cosmological Argument starts off that way. So what you do from here is you go through and you look at each one, and you have this debate, with the person or with yourself. And you say, okay, what begins to exist has a cause. Is that true? How do we know whether that's true or whether that's false? I'm going so fast I've lost my notes. So if we look through that and we begin to say, okay, what begins to exist has a cause. Can you think of anything that just pops into being? In the 17th century, they believed in spontaneous generation. Have you heard of that before? So they noticed that all of a sudden there was a hunk of meat here one day, and the next day there were maggots coming out of it. It just generated life. They call it spontaneous generation. There's all these experiments around putting meat inside a jar and you come back and it's full of flies. And look, the meat generated, it just spontaneously generated flies. There's no such thing. There are in quantum physics and quantum chemistry, there's some particles that appear to just come into existence. They're called gluons and leptons and quarks. And they say that these just appear, they just come, but they don't appear out of nothing. They're actually decomposition products when atoms are smashed together in an atomic accelerator. They last for just picoseconds, just mere slivers of seconds. But they don't come from absolute nothing. Even the atheists agree with this. Yeah, you're right. Everything that exists had a cause. Something caused it to come into being. And no one disputes that statement. So, we're a third of the way through. We've got that one. So we can say, yes, what begins to exist has a cause. The second one is the universe began to exist, and that seems pretty straightforward to us, but then it gets really, really dicey and gets really heavy. A lot of people dispute this one. A lot of people argue about this one. They say, no, the universe has been here forever. It's always existed. It's eternal. And so you go, well, you've got to deal with that. And some say, well, the universe comes and goes and comes and goes. It oscillates back and forth, and so you have to deal with that. So there's all these different opinions. Michael is not going to tell you that the universe had a beginning, and God created it, and God started the beginning. So you're going to have to deal through these objections and talk about these, and that first way to look at that, there's several things, and I'm going to bring about 3 of them up. We got about 10 more minutes we won't get through. This lesson 2 is designed to last 2 weeks. Most of these lessons are laid out for 2 weeks, and so we'll just get the first half today. But there is no such thing as an actual infinite set. This is where I said I was going to challenge your mind. So, everybody loved math, right? Do we have any math teachers? You tell me if I'm wrong, okay? So, if you remember sets, this was like elementary, I think, when we learned about sets. So let's say we're going to have a set of numbers, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that's a set. That's a set of numbers. You could have a set of horses. You could put 4 horses in there, and 4 cows, and have a set of cows. This means that it's a closed set. It's an actual set. It's done. Nothing comes in, nothing goes out. That's a set. When you start talking about infinity, there cannot be an infinite set, an actual infinite set. So let's say we do infinity. So we're going to start off with 0, minus 1, minus 2, dot, 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 dot. And I'm worse than you are, Biff, at drawing. So 1, 2, 3, dot, 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 dot. And you say that's a set, but that's not a set. That's not an actual set. That's not a closed set. You can't close this because it keeps going. You can't close this because it keeps going that way. So it's not an actual set. You can't have an actual infinite set of anything, including time. This is a better way to explain it. Is everybody lost? All right. So if we look at this timeline, this is today, this is time, this is today, and this is infinity past, okay? We're going backwards in time. And we say, okay, we're here today. And that was yesterday. This is all the events that you did. Everything you did yesterday, that arrow is all of those events that you did. And that's a week ago. And that's 5 years ago, that's 50 years ago. This is 500 years ago, the events that happened 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. And we can go on and on and on for infinity. These are events in life that happen. We go back all the way to infinity. An infinite number of events. It's open-ended, going backwards, right? Forever. Now you notice the footprints. And we start over here where there's no infinity going back, but you start at those and you get on this and you call this a timeline, and you walk 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 and you walk, and the end over there is today. And so you walk through all the events of history to get to today. If there is an infinite number of events that go back to infinity, you can never get to today. You see that? We're here today, so that means there's not an infinite number of events that have happened. You can't start from today and walk this timeline backwards and ever get back to the beginning. But we got here today. The same way you can't come forward. If you came from infinity, you can never cross an infinite number of footsteps. It takes an infinite number of footsteps to get here. You can't cross an infinite number of steps to get to today. So time had a beginning. It hadn't gone on forever, because you can't traverse an infinite number of steps. And so that's the universe began to exist, and we can say that because an infinite number of events cannot be traversed. So this is logic, this is reasoning. And remember, we're all trying to get to the point, the universe began. That's the second premise of the whole argument. An infinite number of events can't be traversed. We're Bible people, right? We talk about Bible things. This is what the world talks about. If you're going to talk to young kids that have science minds, people that, are on the Google all the time, the show me people, this is the language you have to use. There's another way to look at it. And I said thanks to Einstein and thanks to Hubble, we've got about 4 minutes left is all. Thanks to Einstein and Hubble, there was a scientist named Edwin Hubble back in the 1920s that took Einstein's theory of relativity and did some more calculations and did some more work around it. He's the man that the Hubble telescope was named after. But they came to this conclusion, this determination, mathematically, that the universe is expanding, that everything is moving out and getting further and further away. And it was all theory until Hubble telescope launches, and now they can see way, way, way out there, and they can see stars, and they can analyze the light that comes back from the stars. And there's an interesting thing that happens with light as it moves a long distance away, and when light moves, it's like Doppler. It's like Doppler radar, when the police are shooting the radar at you, he's sending out a signal, and it bounces, comes back, and the receiver detects how much that wavelength changed to tell how fast you're going, how far away you are, and all of that. The same thing happens with light. And so the Hubble telescope takes light that comes from the far off stars and analyzes that light. And it can look at the wavelengths of those light and tell how fast that star is moving and how far away it is from the other stars. And so if you look at this, you see this is called the red shift. And interestingly, the wavelength shifts in the red area only for things that are moving away. So you see, the further away you get, we're on Earth, and we're looking at the stars out there, and you can see the short wavelengths in the first one because the stars are not that far away. The second one, we're on Earth, we're looking, the wavelength has shifted to the red. The stars are further away. The last one there, see how far that line has shifted into the red? That means it's so much further away than that. If stars are coming closer, then the blue band changes. But this is called red shift, and the scientists look at this, and even the atheist scientists looked at this, and you know what they said? Hubble and Einstein were right. The stars are moving away. They're getting further away. We can see by this red light. We don't like it. But the stars are getting further away. The universe is expanding. And it's expanding like it came from a let there be light moment. Scientists call it the Big Bang, and Christians go, yeah, it was a Big Bang. There's one more thing we look at. We can look at There's ripples out in the far reaches of the universe, the far reaches of the galaxy, and Hubble has determined this as well. And these ripples are indicative of an expansion that's moving out in all directions. If you think about an explosion, you think about some tiny little thing exploding, a firecracker. It starts from a very small area and it blows out in all directions. And as it goes out, everything gets further and further apart. The velocity of the particles slows down. There's a ripple out at the edge like you've dropped a pebble in a pond. And those are all the things they see out in the universe. They see these ripples. They see these stars moving away from each other. And what that tells us is, we said that there's an infinite number of events cannot be traversed. The universe is expanding from a definite beginning, like an explosion. We see that from the redshift. We see it from the ripples in the space-time fabric. And there's one more thing, the second law of thermodynamics. And the second law of thermodynamics is, in fact, I'm going to stop right there because I don't want to get started into that. Anybody have any questions before our bell rings?
But you were using figures of time?
Yes.
Days, weeks, etc.
Right.
Where did that come from?
Well, time is...
I know where it came from.
Do you? Okay. Time is interesting because you can't have time without... So time is equal to... is that. That's time. Time is the difference in distance over the speed of the objects that you're observing. Right? That's time. That's the equation for time. That's a bad looking T. I am worse than you, I told you. So that's time. So this is speed of an object. This is the change in the distance of an object. That speed of an object is a speed of matter. Matter had to be created before you could have speed. You can't have time without speed. You can't have speed without an object. You can't have an object without creation of matter.
You can't have time scientifically without God creating time.
That's the point.
In the beginning,
Yeah, that's the point.
the first day, the second day, the third day,
Yeah.
the fourth day,
Yeah, so
the week.
you have to have, yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
Science has put a definition of the time that God created. But God created time.
Yeah.
We can't even have a discussion about time.
But Michael doesn't want to hear that. Michael doesn't want to hear that. This is Michael's language. That's my point. These people are hostile. You start trying to talk to them, you go, yeah, but God created time. They go, I don't want to hear that. You go, all right then. Where'd this object come from? You know, we eventually get there. But it's just difficult with those people. You know, I've studied a lot about this. I know how they are. They're dogged, you know. They're just dogged in it. So you're exactly right. And that's what we tell ourselves and how we see it. And that's that's kind of the confusing thing I was saying. You know, we have to start and end in Scripture, but we can't start with Scripture with them. When we study it, all of our studies got to come from the Bible. It's got to be start from the Bible. It's got to end in the Bible. But we can't start with them from the Bible. We got to get them to the Bible somehow. But we can't start with that. And so this sometimes sounds like heresy. But there's a lot of people, this is the only way you can get to them, is to talk in their language and to be relevant to what they're experiencing and to find that common ground, and you'll eventually get them to where everybody else is. So thanks for the comment. Anything else? All right, thank y'all.